diversity, communication patterns. When we speak about education, that can also be quite applicable. Now, what is important to understand? Due to the fact that we're all Russians here, I believe, I think, or we live within the Russian culture. We might have different past experiences, that is true, but all of the cultural values that we're going to discuss, you might have a different experience. That's why you might agree or disagree. But what is important is for us to realize that these certain cultural values exist, and certain researchers, academics, decided, people who decided to look into these questions, they decided that such cultural values exist. So we're also going to look into this. And there is an idea that there are 4 key Russian values that reflect the Russian worldview. These values being emotional, the necessity to express the way we feel. That is exactly why so many Russians do not like the idea of a polite smile. And smile out of politeness might be considered insincere. Why would you be smiling to me if you're feeling sad? Or why are you smiling if I know that you don't feel like smiling? So this idea of being sincere and showing what you really feel sometimes contradicts with, let's say, US values of always being positive. Judgmental attitudes, passing moral judgments on other people. Quite often it is considered quite acceptable to say whether certain things are good or bad, or whether people should change their behavior and behave more properly. So in general, being quite judgmental is popular. And when we are at the workplace, or when we go to a cafe, even when we just go somewhere by metro, there is a chance that we might feel judged by other people on the way we look, clothes that we are wearing, the way we are moving. So there is this feeling of judgment in general. Also, there is this cultural value of fatalism. A lot of Russians believe that it's not that Russians don't have control over the world. It's just we might plan everything. We might know everything. We might have a great plan. But we also understand that any moment something might happen. And especially we can understand it especially well right now, when things are changing every hour or every day, almost, I would say. These are the things that happen all over the world, but probably Russians already have got quite a strong immune system towards this, because things have been changing so rapidly over quite a long period of time that probably Russians are very good at adapting to new reality. And at first we feel stressed, but then we're able to pull ourselves together and do whatever we need to do. So we have been pretty much prepared for difficulties, I would say, to a certain extent. And also the value of irrationality, the belief that the world is an irrational place. Things might happen, and at first Russians might feel surprised, but then they would take it as a normal, adequate thing. Things are the way they are. And if you cannot change it, we need to adapt to it and to live. And if you're interested, maybe in future, maybe you have heard about this course, but there is quite an interesting course on Coursera, which is called Understanding Russians, Contexts of Intercultural Communication. Oh, thank you for starting the recording. I think so. Thank you. And yeah, so there is this idea of contexts of intercultural communication. I would say that this course is mostly for foreigners, not for Russians. but it can also be quite useful for us as well, due to the fact that in future or right now we are communicating with foreigners, and it can be really interesting and really useful to understand our own cultural values. Some things might be surprising, and some things might be really eye-opening, I would say, because sometimes we behave in a certain way and we don't understand why we do this. And now when we look into this, we understand, oh, this is because of certain historical aspects, or oh, this is because of the geography, or this is because of certain even linguistics patterns, language patterns that we can use. And there are certain discrepancies and variations that exist between Russian traditional and Soviet era cultures that we're experiencing these days. And we should not actually think that if we were not born during the Soviet times, this does not apply to us. This is not necessarily true. Because certain values will be passed on from generation to generation. And if we do communicate with those people who were born during those times, their values might be passed on to us. And because these values are characteristic of us, we will move on to pass certain values to younger generations. Very interesting. Just the concept, the idea that when certain things cannot be seen, it does not necessarily mean that they do not exist. Taken collectively, Russians in general are more insistent on expressing and reviving solidarity, politeness. However, Americans sometimes might lack expression of differential politeness. But this might be different with different representatives. And we do remember that culture does not necessarily determine every single person, but mostly just can be one of the many characteristics of a person. And we're also going to speak about I-we orientation, human relationships, activity orientation, time orientation, relation to nature, form and substance, progress, history, freedom, discipline, and age. How these ideas are perceived in the US and in the Russian cultures. Another important thing that we can mention is that it is true that different communication patterns exist in both Russia and the United States. And for instance, communicative behavior that can be sometimes expressed in one culture can be viewed as direct and even imposing, whereas the same behavior in a different culture might be seen as not direct enough, maybe even weak. Depends on the person with whom we are communicating. And in terms of basic cultural values, there are certain words, certain keywords or key concepts that exist in a language, and they will often reflect the culture. A very important linguist, and I'm going to mention her name a few times today, Anna Wierzbicka. If you know her, you probably know her if you were doing research or if you've ever been interested in intercultural communication and certain ideas of linguoculturologia. She actually points out that if different words exist in different cultures, in different languages, it means that the ideas behind these words will be a little bit different. If there are two words, it means that there are two different perceptions of the same concept. And we cannot merely translate this word into another language. There might be subtle differences. As we've already mentioned, for Russians, it is extremely important to express the way we feel, both good and bad. Sometimes it might be considered, again, insincere if you're feeling bad and you are showing that you're feeling good. It means that you are not showing your true emotions. And very deep, very concentrated attention to what other people say about their feelings. And sometimes feelings might be considered in a wide variety of contexts. There are certain culturally loaded words like dusha, for example, soul, and it does signal the importance of the inner world. Here it's important to mention that in the English language, a lot of expressions will include the word heart, and soul not so much. So this concept of Russian soul or dusha, and a lot of different expressions that we have got in the Russian language that will include the word dusha, it indicates that this idea is really important for everybody who speaks the Russian language. And also, we can also note down that there is a great variety of active emotional verbs, and such verbs like волноваться, печалиться, удивляться, радоваться. We can compare them to the English terms for their emotional state. For example, for волноваться, we can say to be worried. For удивляться, we can say to be surprised. For радоваться, we can say to be happy. But if we look into these concepts, we will actually discover that there will be subtle nuances that will be typical of the Russian verbs and not so much of the English words. And for instance, there is a very interesting Russian concept, the concept of тоска, тосковать, which can hardly be translated into the English language. And there are a lot of articles on this topic, and it's just very interesting to see how much the words can shape our perception of the reality, and on the other hand, how words can reflect cultural peculiarities. And in terms of opinions, Russians are usually eager to voice their opinions, and sometimes people would expect from others to share their moral evaluations of mutual loyalty, respect, and sincerity. In general, the concept of sincerity is one of the key concepts of the Russian culture. Staying true to yourself, being sincere, showing what you really feel. And in this case, sometimes politeness can even be seen as being a little bit insincere, especially if you don't feel like it. Things are changing these days, though there are certain traditional Russian values that probably will always be with us. In terms of behavior and our attitudes towards the reality, again, agree or disagree, this is up to you. But here's what certain researchers highlight, that relationships are more important than results. If somebody suffers or if somebody feels uncomfortable during certain activities, probably it's more important to support a person emotionally than to just achieve the result. Interpersonal reality can often become external. There is this concept of uncontrollable, unconceivable, which is broader than in the West. Things can go wrong or get worse at any moment. Now, it does not necessarily mean that all Russians are pessimists, for instance. But it can even be seen in such small examples, like, for instance, what Russians usually answer when being asked, how are you doing? How are you today? I don't think that you can remember any cases when you or your friends said, really great, I'm doing amazing, прекрасно, у меня все замечательно, так хорошо, все складывается, дела просто великолепно. I don't think that this is characteristic of the Russian culture. Quite on the contrary, if a person is not doing quite well, Russians, sometimes there will be no response whatsoever, or just, like nodding or something like, and that's it, no words. Or sometimes it can be something like, хорошо. And then with this хорошо, you try to convey that, well, it's been really hard, but you're hanging in there. Or нормально, хорошо, не жалуюсь, в целом хорошо. Usually there won't be very loud or emotional expressions of how great everything is. And it's important to remember that it's not it is not necessarily that bad, or it is not necessarily that the person suffers or something bad is going on. A person might actually be quite happy, but maybe partially this is this sort of fear to jinx things. Like if you say that everything is really, really, really great, what if the next moment something bad happens? Or in general, it is just not accepted to say how great everything is. On the other side, on the other hand, it might seem as if you're boasting, and boasting is not really supported in the Russian culture. And if maybe you experienced it that at school, and I think I've already mentioned it, sometimes teachers might say something like «Я последняя буква в алфавите», «Я последняя буква в алфавите», which means that you shouldn't be too noticeable, you shouldn't be too emotional, you should be part of the collective, part of the group, part of the team. And sometimes this short response might be an indication that, on the one hand, people do not want to say that everything is too good in order not to jinx the current situation. On the other hand, people do not want to boast. And this goes deep, actually, because you do not know how things are going for the person who is asking you. For instance, the person who is asking you, maybe things are not going that well for them, and then you're saying, I'm doing great. So there's also part of the Russian mentality that Russians don't want to boast and to show that they are better than the person who is asking them, how are you doing? So they're trying to, we're trying to keep to be neutral in this response. One cannot completely rely on objective methods of analysis and any other methods of showing that this is the fact. And especially it can be characteristic of changing certain methods that are employed to achieve certain results. For instance, in the group, there might be a person who suggests something new, some new ideas, some new methods, some new tools to make the process easier. And quite often the response from the majority might be something like, why should we do this if the methods that we have been using up until now worked perfectly well? Why should we change anything if we already exist in this reality and everything works perfectly fine? So there can be at times this unwillingness to change and to try new things. This is not characteristic only of Russians. There can be probably just a human trait, because we get used to a lot of things. But here, with the Russians, it can be even more obvious due to the fact that up until now, it has been effective. Why? Why would we do this? And ethical evaluations are important, and there is a tendency toward them in the society. And there are a few ideas that I would like to draw your attention to, that modern Russia is a huge conglomerate of significantly contradictory cultural patterns. There is traditional Russian culture, there is one inherited from the Soviet system, and then there is westernized cultural model. And all these models coexist within one space, within the same cultural space. Let's have a look at some Western, Anglo-American, and Russian politeness strategies and communication patterns. It is important for us to analyze it, because if we make certain language mistakes, for instance, grammar or incorrect choice of vocabulary or pronunciation, this is easily recognized. But certain politeness strategies can be taken as personality traits. If an American is being loud, we might think that they are not very respectful of those who are around them, for example, or too pushy. For Russians, it is quite characteristic, quite normal to start sentences with the words like «нет», «не согласен», «не думаю», «нет». And for us, it is just communicating our ideas. If you say «нет», it means that you disagree, and then you move on to discussing why you disagreed. And this is completely normal. Whereas for Americans, it might come across as a little bit too straightforward. There is this idea that certain behaviors, certain patterns might seem rude and imposing. On the other hand, a different behavior might come across as insecure or indirect, and this might lead to a perception of a person as an unreliable partner, for example, or a pushy employee. And these misconceptions and these wrong ideas might occur within any community and any cultural group. I hope you can see this. Let me know if you cannot. I will try to zoom it in. As for the Russians and Americans, certain differences in their behaviors. For Russians, it is natural to express more emotive data and invest more effort into supporting requests by using justifications. With familiars, with those people who we know, we are usually more direct, and this directness is associated with sincerity. Maybe you can recall it from your own experience that at first, when you start communicating with someone, you use a lot of polite words. You will be like, пожалуйста, если не возражаешь, если это было бы удобно. But with close friends, if we use this many polite words, sometimes it might be perceived as being distant. Like, why are you being so polite? Are we not close friends? Or something like this. Or to our close friends, we can just say, дай, позвони, одолжи, приди. And we would expect them to either help us or not help us, but this directness will indicate that you're becoming closer. This can even be traced in our when we go from вы, which is very, very polite, to ты. So when we get rid of this politeness strategies, we are becoming closer. This is even in this transition from вы to ты. And for Americans, the directness with those who you know really well, it sometimes can be associated with imposition on their freedom, which can be sometimes it's difficult for representatives of different cultures to understand it. And whatever happens, and we might be really well versed in terms of cultural differences, people would still think that the way they behave is normal and any other way is not normal. Our effort and our intention is to try to understand why people behave in a different way, and maybe to not I wouldn't say to change, maybe to change it a little bit so that the person does not get too offended when we're communicating with the representative of another culture, and understand why they are behaving in this way so that we do not get offended. But probably our aim number one is not to get offended and not to let emotions spoil the relationships, first of all, for us. As for the Russians, there is a vast selection of Russian words and expressions that are used to show warmth and inoffensive closeness. And we sometimes try to amplify positive politeness. The amount of diminutives that exist in the Russian language can sometimes be overwhelming even. All of those cute, nice little suffixes that we have got in the Russian language help us to show this warmth that we want to show when we're speaking to another person. Unfortunately, these suffixes sometimes can disappear. They will disappear when we are communicating in the English language. And yes, so sometimes these words, when translated into English, they can seem a little bit patronizing and they can seem a little bit offensive. Just like we discussed with the word «нет», «закрой дверь», «не хочу», «сейчас нет». It can seem a little bit abrupt. Friends in the Russian culture are normally considered intimates, which means that a friend is somebody who can be extremely important in your life. Sometimes people might get divorced, they might change their workplaces, they even might move to another country or another city, and their friends will stay with them, 2 or 3 the closest friends. Whereas for Americans, friends are normally considered acquaintances. And here we can say that usually when Americans move to another city or another country or another state, they will also change their friends. Family is really important to them. But when it comes to friends, they will also be very, very open, very understanding, very helpful, extremely supportive. But in terms of friendship, just like one American once said, he said that family is important and friends are important, but friends are not an integral part of their lives. They are not an integral part, which means that if you have to move for your work, you will have to change and communicate with other people that will be there physically. Again, things vary. There can be different situations, but this is the general perception. Here, it's not you express more politeness to friends and express more politeness to strangers. Here, we're not talking about politeness just like a polite smile or polite words. Here, we're talking about, I would also say mostly, yes, smiling and showing warmth. So for Russians, for us, it is important to support the ones, our nearest and dearest, and to show this support. And with Americans, they would show this support to everyone. The possible danger in miscommunication, when we speak about communication between Americans and Russians, might be that Americans might perceive Russians as a little bit distant and cold, and Russians might perceive Americans as insincere, being superficial, and showing emotions that they do not feel. And another point is that because Americans are so overly friendly to strangers, to other people, Russians, not just Russians, honestly, some of Europeans as well, and some of other nationalities, cultures as well, they might think that because they are so friendly and so nice, we are the best friends now. And the next day, this very American might just pass by and just wave their hand to you or say nothing. And Russians might feel offended because just yesterday they were discussing, they were laughing, they were smiling so much, and now nothing. But to them, it was just a passing moment when they were positive. And another thing which can be true for Americans, that they might find such behavior as from Russians, for instance, or other cultures, as overly friendly, and as if Russians are expecting too much, for instance. So in this case, it is important to stay neutral, or to stay positive, to understand that there are certain cultural values, which does not mean that now we should all behave like Americans. Absolutely not. We just need to know these cultural differences, not to get offended, not to get too hurt, and to be able to handle different situations. How do people process information, and how do people react to certain problems? Again, when it comes to the communication within the Russian community, sometimes Americans can be surprised that they can be offered no answers to their questions, or they can be offered another piece of advice. For instance, they might be asking, I'm going to this shop, where can I find these types of trousers? And Russians, because we want to be helpful, and they might say, oh, but you don't need to go to that shop. It's a really bad one. You need to go to this one. And to them, it might seem as if they are being criticized, and as if a person to whom they are talking knows better what they need. Again, the differences in the perception of advice, giving advice. For Americans, often might say unsolicited advice. Unsolicited advice means непрошенный совет, совет, который никто не просил. Unsolicited advice. And for Russians, it is just being friendly and helping, really caring about another person. Potential mistrust of objective truths, and parallel processing of information. There are different various types of cultures, and here we're talking about monochромные и полихромные культуры. So here, the Russian culture is definitely the type of the culture where we do a lot of things at the same time, and Americans love doing A, B, C, D, and they love it. It will be A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. For Russians, it might be nothing, nothing. Then we will decide and do B, and then we will do A, B, C altogether. Not because we love postponing things, but because we might think that we need to choose, and we need to determine, we need to understand how we're going to act based on the context. And contexts can be different, various conditions. Maybe this is something personal, or maybe another person has not arrived, or maybe we're short of time, or a lot of things can happen. So Russians will make their decisions based on the context more than people from cultures where strategy and sequence is valued. Cultural model, let's have a brief look at this. So here we've got Western culture oriented, S culture, which means Soviet culture, Soviet style, and TR, traditional Russian. Now, again, these are just some generalizations. If you feel that you disagree with certain points, this is completely normal. On the other hand, it can be quite interesting to see what's going on in the modern Russian society. In terms of I and we orientation, Remember how last time I asked you whether you think what is more important, individual or group? And you gave different answers. So here, if we speak about Western oriented, that will be individual. If it is Soviet style or Soviet communication, definitely group. And traditional Russian culture is also group, which means that right now there is everything in the society. And even within yourself, you might have all these three types. It's just in different situations, you might act differently. As for human relationships, individual, Soviet style is ranked, and traditional Russian, mutual. This idea of mutual help, doing something together, activity and orientation. Western culture is doing. Soviet style pretending to be doing. Again, this is a generalization and we might disagree. And traditional Russian is just being there, being present, understanding who you are in relation to the surroundings, to culture, to nature. Time orientation, Western culture, future, Soviet culture, future and past, because we, in the Soviet understanding, we will build a new society. And for traditional Russian, it's present and past. And if you remember, last time I mentioned about the Western culture, that this question that we are asked at the job interview, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself in 15 years? This is the question that comes to us from the Western culture. And in terms of relation to nature, Western oriented will be controlling the nature, building roads, building different bridges. For Soviet style, definitely control as well. This idea of turning rivers into a different direction, building building factories, building roads, definitely controlling nature. And traditional Russian perception is yielding and conforming, meaning that we are mere part of the nature of our surroundings and we should live in harmony with our surroundings. And this is very interesting, this combination that can be seen nowadays in our perception of the surroundings. We love progress, and Russians love new, I would say, some technological progress is really important. But at the same time, and this concept is very typical of the Russian culture, this concept of dacha. The way Russians love their dachas is is extraordinary. People would go every weekend to their dachas. One of the first questions, if you sometimes when you get acquainted with another person, it will be, do you have a dacha, or where is your dacha? And this desire to leave the big city and to be surrounded by the greenery, by the trees, to grow something yourself, because no cucumbers or tomatoes from the shop are any good, and it cannot be even closely cannot be compared to the vegetables and strawberries that can be grown in your little kitchen garden. It's a very interesting combination, and this seems like something so natural to us. Though if you search for it on the internet, you will find quite a lot of articles that are dedicated to the Russian concept of dacha, and it goes back. It has been in our tradition for many decades. This idea of going, leaving for a dacha or country house for summer. Very interesting. As for form and substance, for Western culture, style is important. For Soviet style, outward form is of major importance. That's why, and we still have it, that how you are speaking is as important as what you are saying. And громко, звонко, с расстановкой, this idea of very loud voice and talking to huge amounts of, to a huge audience that is listening to you. And It is considered to be of a benefit if you can speak without a microphone and everybody will hear you. So this form is also important, and loudness is important. Loudness is actually also important for Americans, but this is a little bit different loudness, which is sometimes in European countries and in Russia perceived as not very polite. Sometimes it can come across as shouting. For traditional Russian culture, inner substance is important. Outward appearance can be deceiving. One needs to look into one's soul. So, and it also can be traced sometimes in the way people judge other people. It's like, yes, you are speaking really nicely, but what is the substance of your speech? What is the real meaning? We do have this proverb, if we remember, right? Громко гремит то, что пусто, or something like this. And it can be perceived in both ways. A person who is speaking too loudly and who is speaking too much, they might be perceived as being a little bit shallow at times. So, and here we have got all of these points at the same time in the same space. Progress. Progress is good. In the Soviet style, technical progress is good, social changes are bad, or good social changes are good, depending on the changes. Technical progress is dangerous for traditional Russian culture because it leads to social changes that might be bad. That's why we have got this at the same time, the idea that we love new devices and we love technological progress, but people might still be a little bit careful as for using too much technical progress in terms of staying true to yourself and staying cultured and educated. In terms of history, we can see it on the slide that for Western culture, history as a linear progression, a development for good. For Soviet, ideology shapes history. And for traditional Russian culture, history is a controversial phenomenon, and everything comes and goes, and it goes in circles, and there are certain cycles that happen in the society. As for freedom, discipline, and authority, you can see it here. Very interesting. This whole idea of perception of authority, that in the Western culture, rules and laws must be obeyed even if you don't like them. And in the traditional Russian culture, there is a strong suspicion of authority on all levels in the society, honestly. When new laws are introduced or there are certain rules, people usually think that rules and laws do not exist on their own. They are introduced by other people, and there is usually strong suspicion of who introduced these laws. It can be most significantly seen in the traffic and rules on the road, the way people obey the rules or disobey the rules, and there can be a whole cultural background for this. So something to consider, but in general, we're not saying whether it's good or bad. We're just trying to analyze our behavior and pick the best pattern for ourselves. As for instance, when it comes to the traffic rules, probably we need to obey those ones. As for age, in the Western culture, it means higher position in the official ranks. Youth cannot always be trusted because they don't really have much experience. It can be a little bit contradictory because, on the other hand, young people are the ones who contribute the most to the development of the society, and they bring new ideas and they work a lot. In the Soviet style, it might be not fashionable maybe or convenient to be old because younger generations are the future. And in the traditional Russian culture, there is a big gap between generations. Old people must be supported for what they have done for each of us. And there is also the idea that older generations might be respected more. Last time I also asked you whether you think which age is respected more in the Russian culture, and some of you answered old. Most of you answered old, I think. So there is always be this combination of various cultures within one. As for money, money is an interesting topic. In the Western culture, money brings you everything that you want. It's easy to earn. And price is regarded as an index of quality. In the Soviet culture, people get spoiled by easy money making. And sometimes those who worked enough, those who worked a lot, do not necessarily have enough money to support themselves. And those who have money are all criminals. Why are you so rich? Why do you have so much money? What did you do to get so much money? And in the traditional Russian culture, it's too bad if there is a lot of need for money, and the pursuit of money usually spoils. Again, it goes back to the ideas of traditional values, ideas of materialism and idealism, money and the soul, material and spiritual life. And again, right now in the society, there is a little bit of everything. And sometimes it's difficult to navigate your behavior, your actions. I don't think it's any longer considered bad to be rich or to have a lot of money, but still sometimes it can be a little bit frowned upon if a person is too eager to earn a lot of money. Like, why do you need so much money? You need enough to lead the life that will be comfortable to you. Or money can still be seen as evil to a certain extent. Sometimes, especially if the job is connected with connected with art or connected with communication, like actors or let's say psychologists or teachers, or basically people who help others. Sometimes it will not be expected of them to think too much about money, because this is their vocation, призвание. It's probably changing these days, but there is still this idea that if you're really dedicated to what you're doing, you will not think too much about money. Topic for discussion, but still might be true. In terms of work and education, again, might agree, might disagree, but workaholics are not very popular in Russia. It is important to know how to work and how to relax, how to unwind. In the Soviet times, work is not even considered a means to an end. So work is important, but you need to have some deep, some important aims, which will mean more than work. And in terms of education in Western society, education is very important, but it must be oriented toward getting a well-paying profession, not just knowledge. It is also important that the degree is from a prestigious university. So here, education is the means, is a tool for you to get a good job, for instance. In the Soviet culture, education can be a source of respect. It can be it can help. It can be a form of discipline. It helps you to attain skill, money, to attain status, and it can affect family prestige. So it is important to have a good education, and not everybody could get a good education, and it gives you a certain status. And in the traditional Russian values, education has even greater spiritual value as one's true activity. Being educated means being cultured. That is why, and this is not an exaggeration, if you meet people from other countries, let it be even the United States, or sometimes I would say Great Britain, or any other countries, and if you start discussing which books you have read during your time at school, some people might be really surprised, because this is, for instance, part of their culture, or maybe they have never even read such books. But for Russians, it is a given fact. We are compared. It is true that these days younger generations probably do not read as much, but still, if we study at school and if we attend literature classes, whether we want it or no, we know this set of books, this set of authors. I'm sure that if I ask you right now whether or not you know Hemingway, everybody will know Hemingway. Whether or not you know Ray Bradbury, a lot of people will know Ray Bradbury. I think maybe all of you. If I ask you whether or not you have read Robinson Crusoe, I think that most of you will raise their hands. Whereas if you talk to a representative of another culture, they might not know this. So these ideas of traditional values and the idea of education being part of the spiritual development and being educated, meaning being very cultured, this is also one of the cornerstones of the Russian mentality. I suggest that we have a 10-minute break, and then we shall continue. Right now it's 9:56, and we shall continue in 10 minutes, which will be 10:06. See you in 10 minutes. Let's continue, and let's move on to more linguistic ideas and representations of certain concepts in the language. I think it's really important to mention Anna Wierzbicka. She's originally Polish, but now she has been living in Australia for a long time. And she mostly discusses and speaks about various emotions across languages and cultures. Some of her works are criticized by other researchers, but the main idea that she's trying to get across is that if we have got different words in different languages, it means that the emotions might have certain nuances, which means if we speak different languages, we might perceive reality a little bit differently. This is exactly why we speak about вторичная языковая личность, if you remember from your course of methodology. And this concept of вторичная языковая личность means that when we're studying a foreign language, we're actually creating a second picture, a second understanding of the world around us. So in his famous passage, Edward Sapir affirmed that the worlds in which different societies live are distinct worlds, not merely the same world with different labels attached. And in the light of this evidence that has accumulated, Sapir's insight can be extended. As members of different societies, we live not just in different worlds, but also among different people. And moreover, we ourselves are different people as well. If we compare it throughout generations and in terms of living in different parts of the country, for instance. And we can also indicate that differences in the cultural perceptions and uses of the body and the language may be difficult to measure, to quantify, or to verify experimentally, but we can notice certain differences, and we cannot ignore these variations. The best evidence for the differences as well as similarities between people as bearers and products of cultures, because we are always representatives of the culture, and we are also the product of the culture, and we also transmit it and we show it to other people around us. We can see and we can indicate certain cultural keywords. For instance, keywords like dusha, we've already mentioned it today, roughly soul, heart, mind, or for instance, drug, friend, soul brother in Russian, or here we can see a few words in Japanese. The first word, which means sweet dependence, like we can see here, or another word for Japanese, empathy, kindness. And these words in Japanese provide excellent evidence for insightful and at the same time methodologically informed cultural psychology. We can also see that, for instance, in the Russian language, we have got the word любовь, for instance, and in the Spanish language, we will have two words, amar and querer, which will also mean любить, but the nuances will be a little bit different. So here we can see that certain things that apply to certain conceptual domains also apply to culturally extremely important domain of the expression of certain values and beliefs that exist in a society. There is a considerable Russian vocabulary for the expressing of the emotions. And in general, the idea of pouring out one's soul is lit dushu. It is one of the most common concepts. For many Russians, this is one of the most valued concepts, because feeling and expressing the emotions that you really feel is the sign that you're alive. And also, I would like to add that it is a sign of a person being sincere, that you're not pretending to be polite, you're not pretending to be happy, but you are polite or you are happy. This might be changing, especially in the sphere of service, because nobody likes to see an angry shop assistant, for example. Everybody probably would like to see a smiling person and a polite person. But Russians cannot be fooled. And if the shop assistant is smiling, but you feel that the person is absolutely not polite and not welcoming, this will definitely be perceived negatively. This discrepancy between physical politeness and the message that the person is sending is still very, very important for anybody who belongs to the Russian culture in the majority of the cases. And there are lots of different words that we could discuss right now. This might be a concept of friendship, which is different in Anglo-American and Russian culture. It can be the concept of sadness or toska that we have mentioned. But let's have a look at these two words that probably are not often registered in our mentality. When we think about it, we have got not one but two nouns corresponding to the English word laughter, which is смех and хохот. This is the way these words are spelled in Вишбицка's book. She does not use this KH, she uses this, смех and хохот. And not one, but two verbs corresponding to the English verb laugh, which means смеяться and хохотать. Another case that we can also discuss right now is how difficult it is for the foreign speakers to remember why we say хохотать, что делать, but we say смеяться. So for some reason it is возвратный глагол, and for foreigners it's really difficult to remember it and to use it correctly. Or for instance, we will also say улыбаться, which is an interesting case as well. Well, let me see. I think that somebody might be writing something in the chat. Nope, nothing. All right. In general, we can say that there are three English words, which are giggle, chuckle, and some other words, and they might imply something less than hearty laughter. But of these verbs, the uncontrolled giggle or chuckle has its lexical counterpart in the Russian verb хихикать. So to giggle will mean хихикать. No corresponding noun, by the way, or хихиканье maybe, but usually we just say хихикать. And the word chuckle will be quite difficult to translate into the Russian language. Chuckle. Как тоже хохотать, но хохотать это немножко другое. So in contrast to giggle and chuckle, хохот is definitely laughter. It is full-blown laughter. And хохотать means to laugh with abandon, without inhibitions, to one's heart's content. Хохотать вот от души, usually we would say something like this. And it is different from sub-laughing behavior designated by the English words giggle or chuckle. And it is supported by the following Russian expressions, such as, for example, to be dying from хохот, умирать от хохота. Or the words like хохотать от души. Again, even in this expression, when we're speaking about emotions and feelings, we might be using the concept of душа. Кататься от хохота, to be rolling around with хохот. Or хвататься за бока от хохота, to repeatedly like grab your own sides from this хохот, or трястись от хохота, to be shaking from it. На глазах слезы выступили от хохота, хохотать до слез. Мы можем сказать смеяться до слез, but this idea of хохот is more encompassing, and it's a broader understanding of laughter. We can also about хохот we can say громкий хохот, веселый хохот, дружный хохот, и все дружно захохотали. Достаточно сильно отличается от идеи «и все дружно засмеялись». Захохотали is definitely, it's a broader and a more colorful, vivid description of the situation. And sometimes the adjectives that typically occur with хохот suggest that in Russian culture, the loud and unrestrained behavior in question is not always viewed with any disapproval, and sometimes it can be seen as healthy. For example, for a person we can say хохотун, or for a female representative we can say хохотушка, хохотунья, which is not necessarily in any ways disapproving. And in this respect, it vice versa suggests that the person is being sincere and the person is showing their real emotions. We're not speaking now about business communication, for instance, where it might not be acceptable. But whereas we're talking about хохот and смеяться, it might be worthwhile mentioning the idea of улыбка and smile in the American and the Russian culture. That for Americans, it is very natural to smile and show all of your teeth in your mouth, which shows the friendliness. And in the Russian culture, it can be sometimes perceived and viewed as оскал, что ты скалишься. And sometimes a nice, polite smile will be smile without showing any teeth, for instance, or showing a little bit of teeth. But also this is connected with the body expression of our thoughts, of our emotions mostly. Here, what we need to keep in mind is that even such small things, small variations like смех и хохот, even if such small things can vary in different cultures and have a little bit different sub-meanings, it means that there are certain cultural differences that might be quite interesting to discover and analyze. And the last thing that I would like to discuss with you is a book or a story that is characteristic of the Russian culture. Imagine that you are talking to your foreign friend, and not let it be an American or a British person or a Japanese person or a Chinese person. Will you please think of your favorite either fairy tale or book or film or cartoon, something that is Russian in its core, something that was originally produced in Russia maybe many years ago, maybe quite recently. I will give you 1 minute to think about it. And will you please write in the chat just one suggestion, one idea that you would recommend your friends to watch or to read? I would say that think of your fairy tales, of your favorite fairy tales, or maybe one fairy tale that you really loved in your childhood. Let it be fairy tales, actually, because if we speak about films and cartoons, it will be too broad. Let's concentrate on the fairy tales. It can be both cartoons or a book that you read, and try to type it. You're typing in Russian. Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, and if we're talking about, for example, classical literature, can I read something
Yes,
that...
go ahead. Go ahead. Everything will be interesting, especially if it is the first thing that comes into your mind. We'll just have a look at it. Let me see. 30 more seconds, and we'll discuss it. Okay. Аленький цветочек, летучий корабль, конек-горбунок, волшебник изумрудного города, Storm or гроза, конек-горбунок, как интересно, несколько раз. Иван-царевич и серый волк, All dogs go to heaven. Is it Russian though, Anton? Or just your favorite? You're mentioning your favorite one. Okay. Гуси-лебеди, Финист ясный сокол, Мастер и Маргарита. Okay, going into okay, Bulgakov. Couple more. This is how I will know that you were present at the lecture, actually. if you write your answers here. Okay, Peter Pan. But how Russian is this? You're just writing you're just writing your favorite books. I see. So the task is for you to recommend your favorite Russian fairy tale or book to your foreign friend. Something. So you're talking to your foreign friend, and they don't really know much about the Russian culture, and you need to give them something, to explain something to them. Okay. Курочка Ряба, Чиполлино. Okay. I feel like the message is it's good. Okay, this is your favorite book, Чиполлино, but this is, I think, Italian, not Russian. Если русскую, то серая шейка. Okay, thank you. The Tale of Tsar Sultan, Конек-горбунок, мультик. Окей, мультик. Ну хорошо, Незнайка. Мы определили пул книг и историй, которые вы можете упомянуть. Но задание, у вас техническое задание было упомянуть русскую сказку желательно или любую книгу, которая на вас произвела впечатление, и вы хотите своему иностранному другу представить русскую культуру вот через это произведение. Мультик Чиполлино. Вы настаиваете на том, что Чиполлино – это русская сказка. Это интересно. Что тут можно сказать? Но тут мы можем сказать нет. Ну, просто вам нравится. Хорошо. Я поняла вас. Но тут тоже такой интересный момент. Мы, конечно, можем обсудить, когда какие-то произведения иностранные настолько плотно вплетаются в русскую культуру, что мы уже... Советский мультфильм. Поняла вас. Это хорошее, интересное замечание. Иногда настолько сильно иностранные произведения вплетаются в культуру, что мы это воспринимаем как свое. Это тоже интересный момент. Тот же самый «Волшебник изумрудного города». Казалось бы, это Wizard of Oz, но Волков так переписал, что нам кажется, что это наше. «Шерлок и Холмс» фильм настолько его сыграли наши русские актеры, что мы считаем, что это вообще наш фильм советский. Ну погоди, Простоквашино, Морозко, Чебурашка, Аленький цветочек. Okay, good. Thank you for the answers. I don't think that everybody has answered, but if you think of something else and some other ideas come into your mind, please feel free to share. Do so, please. All right, good, thank you. Today we're going to speak briefly about one Russian fairy tale, which is called Емеля the Simpleton. Емеля Дурачок, in fact, it is translated, in Russian it is Емеля Дурачок, and in English it is translated Емеля the Simpleton. Also important for us to know how to translate certain expressions into the English language when we want to explain it to our foreign friends or acquaintances. And why else fairy tales are important for us and for our understanding. This is intricately intertwined in our mentality. This is something that we have been watching since our early childhood. Yes, I can see you keep sending your answers. Thank you. Lots of different fairy tales. The clever fox and the stupid bear. The round-bread colobok who goes off into the woods looking for adventures. Prince Ivan and the Loyal Grey Wolf. I think some of you has actually mentioned it. The wicked old magician Kощey the Deathless. The evil witch Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga is very special and is very characteristic of Slavic cultures. And I'm sure that every single one of you knows what Baba Yaga is. I wouldn't expect anybody not to know what it is. But for a lot of foreigners, it is an unknown concept. And for us, it is something that is part of our perception of the reality. Things that she does and things that she represents. A simpleton, a fool, in Russian durak, sometimes affectionately called durachok. This is the universal plot of naive, sometimes lazy, sometimes shrewd misfit in this folk tale, and it has got some typically Russian features. What is interesting about this idea of simpleton, durak, durachok? In this very sphere, we can also mention the concept of yurodivый, and there will be certain parallels. But here the idea is that, yes, the person is not very doesn't love to work that much, or this person is kind of lazy, but for some reason they are really shrewd and lucky, and they are the ones who sometimes all of a sudden get everything, but most importantly they are kind. And this is this characteristic of kindness that angry people don't get anything, but you need to be kind, and then maybe you will get everything that you need. It's interesting concept that if we trace it, we might find it in certain attitudes within the Russian people. So while his brothers are working hard, Yemelya spends the whole day lying on a stove. Now, let's see. Willow, please, you can unmute yourself or tell me, what is the centerpiece of every Russian peasant's house? Or you can type it in the chat. I've already said it, but I'm interested in the Russian equivalent. The centerpiece of every Russian peasant's house. You can type it or just say it. Let me see if we've got the answer. Pech. Exactly, you're absolutely right. Yes, pech or pechka. See, even here we're using diminutive forms, not pechka, pechka, because it's cute and nice. So it is the centerpiece of any Russian peasant's house. And literally, the life of the family revolves physically and metaphorically, because this pechka serves both as heater and oven. It is usually in the middle of the house. It is made of bricks. It is fed with wood, and it is designed to retain heat for as long as possible. And it gives out a steady, constant heat. And it needs to be fed with wood a couple of times a day. And the peasants' izba is another extremely interesting concept of the Russian culture. It stays warm even through the bitterly cold winter days. The food inside the pechka, inside the oven, inside the stove, cooks to perfection. There is a nice warm sleeping place above the stove, usually occupied by the most privileged members of the family, the grandparents, who can be there and always stay warm. And here it is occupied by Yemelya, the simpleton Yemelya Durachok, and it is very hard to convince him to get down and help around the house, although he does do so when he's promised sweets from the market or a pair of red boots. And on one winter day, while his brothers are away on business, he's sent to fetch some water. He collects a couple of buckets and an axe, and sets off to the frozen river. He makes a hole in the ice with the axe, and after filling the buckets, he stares for a while into the river's dark water, and suddenly he sees a pike. The pike, in Russian, shuka. In this case, it is the magic fish. It talks to Yemelya, it begs him to let it go, and promises him that if he does, his every wish will come true. And all he has to do is to say, by the pike's command, by my wish. The Russian for it, of course, we all know, по щучьему велению, по моему хотению. And to test this, he tells the buckets of water to go home by themselves, and off they go. And Yemelya lets the pike go, and he heads back home with his new magic powers. And he uses these words, by the pike's command, by my wish, по щучьему велению, по моему хотению, a lot of times. And the story continues, and he gets even more lucky, and everything happens to him in a great way, and he sees great changes. And here we can see that inertia is rewarded in the tale of Yemelya, in this very fairy tale. But in other stories, usually generosity, curiosity, resourcefulness, kindness, self-sacrifice, and living in harmony with the natural world is rewarded. Usually good-natured people get more benefits, and they are able to enjoy more advantages than people who are not so kind-hearted or good-natured, which is an interesting idea. The idea that whatever happens, it is important to live in harmony with the natural world, and this idea of being generous, being kind. The concept of self-sacrifice is enormous in the Russian culture, and it can be traced and can be viewed in all periods of life, starting from traditional Russian values, a lot of fairy tales, when self-sacrifice is considered to be one of the most important concepts of the society. And moving on to the Soviet perception of doing something for the collective, for the team, for the group, for the common good, для общего блага. And in general, we can see in Russian fairy tales that a person is lying on the stove, лежит на печи, на печке, for many, many years, and then miracle happens, and everything is in its right place. We can only guess how it might have influenced the Russian mentality, and whether or not it is in some ways connected with the thing that some of the Russians do, especially if we speak about Russian students, especially if we speak about deadlines, when procrastination happens and a person is putting off things that they need to do. I'll do this tomorrow, 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 tomorrow. And there is this inner hope, inner belief for a voice, не бойся, a voice, and maybe some sort of miracle, maybe something will happen. So this belief in, again, we have already mentioned it, extra, something that happens beyond the will of a human person, some superior forces that happen in the world. Again, the world is changing, and cultural values might also be changing. But still, it's interesting to see certain interpretations of things that are part of our culture. And from the language point of view, let's have a brief look at some language notes. We all use it. I think we sometimes use it in our speech. По щучьему велению, by the pike's command. We can use this phrase when we're talking about something good that comes out of nowhere, as if by magic. Как будто по щучьему велению. Or to tell someone that he or she is lazy and wants everything to happen by magic. Ну что ты хочешь, чтобы все по щучьему велению происходило у тебя? Мели, Емеля, твоя неделя. Keep talking, Yemelya, you're on a roll. This expression is not the story of Yemelya and the magic pike, but is one most people think of as being connected with the tale. Молоть almost means to mill, and can also mean to talk rubbish. Молоть языком, to mill with the tongue, or to say certain things. This expression means you do not believe a single word of what someone is saying. Okay. And Отпусти меня, я тебе пригожусь. Let me go, I will be of service to you. This is what the pike says to Емеля, and this is what many magic animals say to those who catch them in other Russian tales. Я тебе еще пригожусь. Мне неохота. I don't feel like it. Typical of Емеля, who would rather stay lazing on the stove. Ни в сказке сказать, ни пером описать. Impossible to tell in a tale or to describe with a quill. Quill, перо. Used in many fairy tales about something or someone extraordinary beautiful. Ни в сказке сказать, ни пером описать. Extraordinary. Пир на весь мир, a feast for the whole world. The important concept, we can dedicate another hour to it. This is the idea that when we have got guests, we need to have, the стол должен ломиться от еды. Different different kinds of meat, salads, drinks, bread, pies, everything goes there on the table. For Americans, it can be a little bit different. For instance, if they know that 10 people are coming, they will have 10 pies. Or if they know that 17 people are coming, they will have 17 of something. So that food does not go to, so everybody eats what they need to eat. And for Russians, it's important to have пир на весь мир, to share the joy of being together, to have this feast. Besides with food, Russians show respect. I respect you so much that I want you to eat and eat and eat, and with food I show my love. Вот и сказки конец, а кто слушал, молодец. This is the end of a fairy tale, good for the one who was listening, a very common ending for a fairy tale. And another one that we might remember from fairy tales is Я там был. I will tell you in Russian, in English, you will probably be able to recognize. I was there too. I drank honey and beer. It poured down my mustache, but never reached my mouth. По усам текло, а в рот не попало. To say, to indicate that maybe it was true, maybe it was not. Maybe it's just imagination, or maybe it's not, because I was there. So to wrap everything up, what can we see? We can say that there are certain cultural differences, and we need to take into consideration the differences that are typical and characteristic of the representatives of other cultures. We need to very well be aware of our own cultural peculiarities, and these peculiarities can be seen and analyzed through language. And language is so powerful that it both shapes us and it can help us to formulate, to form our own ideas and to get our ideas across. And nothing goes unnoticed. Everything is very meaningful. And a lot of things can be seen and can be analyzed in any aspect of the culture, be it the house, the furniture, other sorts of texts, fairy tales. In general, fairy tales are very powerful and they are very resourceful in terms of analyzing values, beliefs, and traditions of a certain nationality or cultural group. So it's important to remember our own cultural values and our own origin, and it is extremely important both to understand our own heritage and our values and beliefs, and it is equally important for us to be able to communicate these ideas of Russian cultural heritage, of Russian mentality and Russian national character. It is important to communicate these ideas to our friends and colleagues from other countries. So being truthful to our culture, our own culture, and being able to communicate and maintain effective communication with the representatives of other cultures, mutually enriching ourselves. That is all for today. Thank you very much, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.